Monrovia Moments with Steve Reeder, and today we're interviewing Mark Jaynes. What year did you graduate?
1982.
And the one thing that's going to make this interview just really important is you're only the second person we've interviewed that attended Hall.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a little bit about your childhood growing up in Hall and then attending Hall School.
Well, my parents, fortunately, made the decision along with my grandparents to move here from Indianapolis. I lived on the east side. And it was the late 1960s when we purchased property, which was once part of the old Houck Farm out on Baltimore Road, and adjoining 10-acre tracts. And when we moved, I was in first grade, and there was 2 weeks left in the school year here. But my parents went ahead and sent me to Hall so I could get to know the kids. And it was interesting because, it was a much smaller school than I was used to, being an IPS school. I remember the first day I was there, we went down to the library, and it consisted of like 2 carts on wheels with books. And I'm like, where am I? But little did I know as we moved forward, Mrs. Brakefield, God rest her soul, was my first grade teacher and a wonderful woman. And I can name all of the teachers that I had. In fact, that's what an impression that they made upon me. And made friends quickly, luckily. And I was there. It was my second grade year when they were completing the first phase of renovations out there. And that took a little longer than it should have. All of the classes and grades were basically combined into one room, which was a bit of a challenge. And when the first renovation and expansion was opened up, obviously we were over the moon happy, and they put the multi-purpose room and the cafeteria and all that on. But, some of the teachers that I had there, Miss Cata Henry, eventually became Mrs. Dooley once she got married. I was the last class that Arlene Robinson had as a longtime math teacher out there. We were her final class before she retired. Randy Tutterow, a lot of folks from Martinsville will know Randy. Yeah. Steve Kreitz, that was out at Eminence for a number of years, and Regina Young, and the list goes on and on and on. But the guy that guided us through each and every crazy day out there was the legendary Niall Denny, one of my favorite all-time people.
Now, the one thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is Hall had its separate mascot and colors. Mm-hmm. So what was this?
We were the Hall Tigers, and the colors were black and white. And when I was in 5th and 6th grade, we would play basketball games against Monrovia Elementary, because as you know, at that time, you lived in Monroe Township. Sure. You came here and you went out to Hall if you lived in Gregg Township. And we would play in what our studio is in now, yes. The old multi-purpose room when we came here. And then we would play, in the cafeteria / gymnasium multi-purpose room out at Hall.
You mentioned Niall Denny, and you have told the story a couple of times, but it is just great. So give us the importance of Niall Denny for you.
Well, he gave me the inspiration to start my broadcasting career, and I can show you right where it happened. We were out on recess, and we'd been playing softball for 2 or 3 days, and on the east end where the playground is out there now, if you go up the steps, he's standing there, hands on his hips like this, as he always did, one foot in front of the other, and he called me Howard Cosell, famous sportscaster of the day, and he says, "Howard, come here, I want a word with you." And I thought, okay, what do I do now? And so he said, what do you think you want to do with your life? And I said, I'm going to be a Major League Baseball player. And he said, well, I watched you play softball for a couple of days. You might want to rethink that because you're not very good. He said, but with your obvious inability to keep your mouth shut and your love of sports, you should think about a career in broadcasting or journalism. That's God's honest truth. And so we went down to his office, which I was glad to do because I was in there for the right reasons, for a change. And didn't have to put my hands on the desk that time. And so, he talked to me about, calling radio stations and talking to disc jockeys or learning how to write and do newspaper articles and things of that nature. And for whatever the reason, boy, I tell you, it sparked an interest in me. And literally, if we did a book report, I did it on some elements of broadcasting. And my parents bought me a realistic cassette recorder, and I would make mock-up Indy 500s and make up mock Indy 500s and watch ball games on television and call them back into a cassette recorder. And then, got into junior high, and I remember 7th grade science here with Gary Ogden. I did a book report on weather forecasting and meteorology, and Stan Wood, who was a longtime legendary weatherman at Channel 8, sent me a cloud chart and everything. He was the only one that responded out of all those guys in Minneapolis. I wrote to every one of them. And so I remember talking to Don Fisher very early on in his days at WIRE radio. about a career in broadcasting. So yeah, and it just blossomed from there, I guess. Was always in the right place at the right time.
So again, you mentioned this. So back then, Gregg Township went to Hall till 6th grade. Monroe Township went to Monrovia till 6th. Then everybody came here to the junior, senior high school. You have had great stories about, and also not only just the relationships, but the impact that some of the high school and junior high staff have had. Give us some of the Oberly and some of these people.
Well, this is a family show, and some of those stories I can't tell. But I mean, if you think about it, you've got some of those people sadly are no longer with us, like Wayne Staley, longtime football coach, Bob Luker, that everybody will remember who's been around here any time at all. Wonderful man, taught zoology and ecology in the rooms that you're in now. Jim Burns, and I've reconnected with Jim, who now lives in Sebring, Florida. John Hawkins, that everybody knows. Jerry Pfeiffer, a recent inductee into the Athletic Hall of Fame. Rex Nichols, Gary Venable, Jim Kaiser, Doug Coddington, Mike Gillen. Phil Schneider was the first journalism teacher I had here, and then Mary Wood took over for him. And Georgia Roll, longtime English teacher here that was just phenomenal. And, I think, not knowing at that time that I would end up in education, I do remember them teaching from a mindset that they treated freshmen like freshmen, sophomores like sophomores, and gave seniors the respect that seniors deserve. And I think I try to emulate them in that regard. But, just some amazing stories. I mean, to tell you how things have changed with things you could not get by with. When Jerry Pfeiffer took over as athletic director, baseball diamond was the opposite of the way it is now. And it was all dirt and glass and rocks and other things. It used to be a dump once upon a time, I guess. And so late in the year, we'd need to get games in if we get rain. Well, Jerry would come down at first period and pull me out of class, me and Jeff Rigsby, and he would hand us $20, which was not easy for Jerry to do. He would hand us $20, give us a couple of 5-gallon cans, and we would go to Mooresville Sand and Gravel in his truck, now giving students the keys to his vehicle. And we would drive over to Mooresville Sand and Gravel. We would get sand, and he would be here dipping water off the diamond, and we would spread the sand and pour kerosene over the top of it, and he'd light the kerosene and burn it off, and we'd get ready to play baseball.
Yeah.
I think they might frown upon that.
Right, yeah. There's a lot of things today that wouldn't happen. But back then, you guys had an open lunch, right?
Yes, we did, yeah.
So there was a lot more freedom and leadway with students.
Well, yeah, two 45-minute lunch periods. And I remember in junior high, if you go out to where our middle school hallway is now that leads to the gymnasium, there were double doors there. And I'm sure many people remember that. And about, I would say, maybe 25 yards outside of those doors, there was a tree line and a fence row because we had not purchased that property at that point. And the students would go that way when the restaurant was there on 39.
The chicken.
Yep, and they would go there for lunch. You could go uptown to lunch, but they would also go out there off campus and smoke. And occasionally our principal at the time would go out there and have a cigarette with them. And again, this was the mid-1970s when things were a lot different for sure.
Well, that's the one thing that students in class are kind of amazed at is just how different downtown was. And we've had a lot of interviews, and people said you could do all your shopping in downtown Monrovia. And there were multiple restaurants at the time and grocery stores. But yeah, the chicken is really kind of an iconic thing of the time period.
Well, keeping stats for Doug Coddington and Jim Kaiser, I mean, one of the coolest things that I think I got to do when I was a sophomore in high school was I was keeping stats for the baseball team. And Jim Kaiser, I would walk in the football building out there where we ran baseball out of in the spring, and he'd hand me $10 and he'd say, hey, run up to Meyring's, get us a couple of sandwiches and a couple of bottle of Fagos, and give me the keys to his red and white Mercury Cougar. Had a white vinyl top and a Pioneer cassette deck in it. The only thing that disappointed me though is Coach Kaiser, the first time I ever pressed the cassette in, I thought, as cool as he is, he's got to have cool music, and it was an Ambrosia cassette, for God's sakes. The biggest part of me by Ambrosia came on, and I thought, well, he's a math teacher, so that does make sense, I guess, you know.
So when so you were manager for football and then baseball as well?
And basketball too, yeah. And in addition to that, I'd worked 20 hours a week at Burger Chef in Mooresville, so I stayed pretty busy.
Who was the basketball coach at the time?
Dave Oberly was the basketball coach. He had taken over from Pete Leahy, and I mean, a very competitive basketball team, close to double-figure wins every year, which was, you know, a bit of a turnaround from some struggles that we had. And he was my driver's ed teacher, and I got to give him a lot of credit for. He was the one that really got me involved in athletics here. He really did my sophomore year.
And he was the PE teacher at the time, wasn't he?
Yes, he taught PE and was a freshman football coach, and also was the varsity basketball coach.
Okay, so you have several great Oberly stories, and I know you've said this is a family show, but tell the story about the driver's ed where you guys had dinner.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, anyone that knows him will not be surprised by this. And mind you, he had left Monrovia and been gone for a number of years. But when I was a football coach, we had a lift-a-thon. And so Kyle Moyer came in. Kyle graduated with me. He's general manager of Penske Racing and Hall of Fame member himself, and has won like 9 Indy 500s in various capacities with race teams. And so Kyle brought some, at the time, Andretti memorabilia for us to give away at our lift-a-thon. And so we were going to have dinner with me and him and Jim Kaiser and Dave Oberly. So we go to the restaurant here in town, Main Street, and I walk into the restaurant, and Coach Oberly's the first one there. And so we sit down, and Coach Kaiser comes in, and Kyle Moyer, and we start talking, and we're there for about 40 or 45 minutes. And then Coach Oberly says, well, guys, I guess I need to go. I've got kids out in the car. I'm teaching driver's ed. And if you knew him, you know, if you know him, that's not a big surprise. But that's just one of, I mean, Coach Reeder and I sat together at a basketball game about a month ago, and I realized I hadn't told him all of these stories, and he about passed out laughing at most of it for sure. So,
who was the baseball coach at the time?
Doug Coddington was the baseball coach, and Jim Kaiser was his assistant.
Wow.
Yeah.
So and it's just amazing to me, like, if you think about who the coaching staff was at the time and what they have went on to do, and it's just really kind of remarkable, the staff at the time in the early 80s.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, a lot of those guys went on, you know, to be in various halls of fame, Jim Kaiser and Rex Nichols and all of those guys. And I think, you know, Dave Oberly is, I think, arguably one of the best athletes ever at Decatur Central High School, and was the standout football player at Indiana State University, and the list goes on and on and on. Let's not forget that about that same time there was a pretty good football player who went through here that went on to achieve a fair amount of success as a head football coach, and that's Rick Strife.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you told a great story the other day about how you got into WCBK.
Yeah,
so
well,
do that again.
So I had Dave Oberly for driver's ed after my freshman year, and you know, I was kind of the class clown, to put it mildly. And so we got along really, really well that summer. And he told me, you know, he said, you know, you need to straighten up a little bit and stop being such a pain. And he says, I know what it's like because that's the way I was when I was in school. So he said, I think you need to become a football manager. I couldn't play because of an injury to my eye when I was really young. And so no doctor would release me. So I wanted to get involved with it somehow. And so he took me into Coach Staley's office and said, hey, I found us a manager. And Staley goes, well, I'm not messing with him. and Hope says, well, I think he's turned over a little bit of a new leaf, so let's give him a shot. And he said, okay. He said, it's your responsibility. If he screws up, it's on you. And so we walked out, and Hope said, don't screw up. And I said, I won't. And again, I'm editing for content. And so all summer, in those days, you couldn't do any football stuff. It was just, you know, weight training and running and things of that nature, and I didn't miss a day. So we get close to the date for the live-in camp that Coach Staley started here years ago, and I had to call him and tell him, I said, Coach, I can't make camp because my parents are going on vacation to Colorado Springs, and I'm going to go with them. And I said, so I'll see you when I get back. And he said, no. He said, I appreciate all your work this summer. He said, but, you know, whether you're a manager, a coach, or a player, in order for us to be successful, he said, everybody has to invest in our program. And we need you to be there just like all of us need to be there. And I said, well, can I think about it and then call you back? He said, no, if I see you Monday, I see you. And if I don't, I don't. He said, but no hard feelings. I appreciate, again, all you did. And so something told me that I needed to stay. And so luckily, my grandparents were living next door, and I could stay with them for a couple of days. And my parents reluctantly allowed me to stay. It's a big step for them because they were leaving one of their kids at home on vacation for the first time. And I was only, as I said, between my freshman and sophomore year. And maybe it's because I was such a pain they didn't want me in the car with them. I don't know. But anyway, it worked out. And so I walked in a football building first day of camp, and he looked up and he said, "Boy, I'd have lost that bet."
Yeah.
He said, "But I'm glad to see you." And so then, as I mentioned, I took Phil Schneider's journalism class, Journalism 1, and school started. We were in school about 2 weeks. And so I get called down to Coach Staley's office, and there's a guy standing there. And Staley says, "That's him. That's what I was telling you about." And the guy stuck his hand out and said, "Hi, I'm Dave Sockel. I'm the sports director at the Martinsville radio station." He said, "We're looking for somebody to do sports reports for Monrovia football and basketball." And he said, "It pays $5 a game." And he said, "You got to call it in by 11 p.m. And that was before cell phones. So for road games, I had to get an AD to let me in his office, or I had to find a payphone somewhere. And so if I went 4 weeks into the season and I missed, if I went 4 weeks into the season and I missed my deadline, any money that I had made to that point was wiped out. I had to start over again. I didn't get paid until the season was over. But simply put, you know, I did that for 3 years, and then they hired me right out of high school for my first job in radio. And if I go on vacation with my parents, I don't know that any of this happens with my broadcasting career.
Yeah.
I don't know that any of it happens. And I think it, for whatever the reason, Coach, if I go all the way back to that first conversation with Niall Denny, I guess I always had enough sense to realize when somebody went out of their way for you, you better take them up on the offer.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate enough that God blessed me with the sense to pick up on that. And, you know, I've had an amazing career, I think, from a standpoint of the things that I've been able to do. I've been very blessed. I've been very lucky. I've been in the right place at the right time. But I've had a hell of a lot of help.
Right.
You know?
So what was the step in your career after WCBK?
Well, I left there and I went to work at a station in Spencer for a while, and then my career kind of stalled out because that station really wasn't going anywhere. And then I actually got out of it for a long time and worked at a warehouse grocery store. Cub Foods was the first one in Indianapolis, and I worked night stock at 38th and Lafayette, which was an experience in itself. And so Louise Black, who taught here.
Oh, right, yeah.
Louise was the person that encouraged me that I needed to pursue an education. And so applied to IU. They wanted me to take remediation classes. And fortunately for me, Indiana State at the time was taking about anybody with a pulse. And so I landed at ISU. And since I had had some broadcast experience, the campus radio station hired me. And I started doing high school sports for them, ISU football, basketball, and baseball. Well, Dave Sabini, who directed that station, was at the time doing color commentary for the ISU broadcast for WTHI radio.
Okay.
And Bob Forbes was the longtime voice of the Sycamores. He did the games with Bob. Well, part of the contract necessitated them to do some girls basketball and some baseball on their AM station. Dave did those games because Bob didn't want to do them. Well, once Dave heard me and learned of my experience, he had me work with him. And so WTHI heard me, and they developed some interest. And then my sophomore year, I went to work for them full-time. They offered me a full-time job doing afternoon news. And that station at the time was owned by the Holman George family.
Sure, okay.
Now, that really wasn't what got me connected with IndyCar Radio, because you know, I eventually got married. Just recently observed the 38th anniversary of our blind date, by the way. 37 years of marriage to Desiree this fall. But my daughter was born, and we wanted to kind of move back here, so we did. And I went back to WCBK in Martinsville and eventually became news and sports director there. The ownership at the time, not Dave Keister, but it was difficult, and it was not going in a positive direction. And that was from 90 to 94. And then in 1994, I had the opportunity in the fall of that year to go back to WTHI, and I jumped on it. And I was living here and driving over there.
Sure.
That's how much it meant to me to go back there.
Right.
And then in 1995, they announced the formation of the IRL. And John Royer, who was the affiliate relations director, I had worked with John at the Indiana State Fair, and John was the one who encouraged me to reach out to Bob Jenkins. And so in the fall of '95, I applied for a position with the IRL. They announced they announced their broadcast crew, and I was not part of their first race in Orlando and Phoenix. And then Mike King, who was on the network at the time, eventually became the anchor. Mike came back to Terre Haute, where we worked together. He worked on the television side, and he told me at the Chamber of Commerce dinner, he said, "Hey, I think you're getting a call." And I did, and Bob called me, and Bob Jenkins called me and interviewed me. And I started the second weekend of qualifying in 1996. And my first interview was with Danny Ungaius, who was tabbed to replace Scott Brayton, who had been killed in an accident. So I got thrown kind of in the deep end. But after my first 500 in 1996, which, by the way, I didn't know how much it paid. I never asked. I didn't know until the check came in the mail, because you can't put a price tag on a dream come true.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't about the money for me. And so I came home, and my wife said, "How do you think it went?" And I said, "Well, I think it went pretty well." But I said, if they don't ask me back, I've done it one more time than a lot of guys get to.
Right, oh yeah.
And so for 28 years now, I've been playing with house money. I did pit reporting through 99. And then in 2000, I moved to Turn 3. And I was there for 15 years. And this will be my 9th year as the voice of the 500.
So there's only been 7 people as the voice?
I'm in 6th.
So you're, okay.
Yeah, I'm in 6th.
So what was that first race like? The first 500 that you were the voice of the 500. What was that like?
Well, it was the 100th, which added a lot to it. I leaned on Bob. I leaned on Mike King and Paul Page a lot for advice. Donald Davidson too, and so I listened to a lot of races from a lot of different eras and came up with some ideas and whatnot. The night before, obviously, I didn't sleep very well. And I kind of developed a race day routine that I continue to this day. We have meetings, and I have media. I think I did like 12 interviews race day morning this last year. And then we have a production meeting at 10 o'clock. We go on the air at 11. And when that meeting's over at like 10:20, I go find a quiet place where nobody can find me. And I sit and just kind of, calm myself a little bit. And then when we go on the air at 11, we're off and running. The pre-race is the hardest part, because there's so many elements you're trying to time into, like taps and back home again in Indiana and all of those things. And I brought a lot of those things back to the broadcast coach, because I want people who aren't there to feel like they are.
Right.
And that's my goal with that. But the one thing Mike told me, which is true, that when the race is over and you sign off and say so long, and by the way, I always thank Monrovia, my closing comments every year. And so when I was done, I pushed back from the counter, and my hands are they're like this.
Right.
Because my mind is moving so fast for so long, and it's just not possible to just shut it down like that, And I walked home, and we were living in Speedway at the time, and a lot of neighbors were coming out congratulating me, and that was cool. And my grandson was there, and we had a lot of family there. But I walked in the house, and I went downstairs, and I sat in a recliner. And my wife came down, and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I don't want all these people here next year."
Right.
I said, I've got to have time. And it's really a day or so before I feel like that I'm somewhat back to normal because of the demands of it, for sure.
So other than the racing, you also do a lot of broadcasting for the IHSAA. What's some of the roles you have there?
I've been very, very fortunate there. I mean, you're talking about a guy who never wrestled that does the wrestling state finals. You're talking about a guy who can't swim who does the swimming and diving state finals. But, again, it was just a matter of being in the right place at the right time and making some really good connections. It kind of started in 2001. Vince Welch was the sports director at WIBC in Indianapolis at the time, and Vince and I had been pit reporters together. And he essentially started the IHSAA Champions radio network. And so the first guys, there were only 5 classes then. It was the RCA Dome, and it was Kevin Lee, Kristen Airy, Vince Welch, and me did the play-by-play. And then I developed some contacts with some other folks that went to work. I had worked with prior to. I did some games for Cathedral Football years ago on AM 1430, and Chris Kaufman was on their staff at the time. He's now with the IHSAA, and he kind of took over their communications wing. And so Chris, pitched me on the idea of doing swimming and diving and doing wrestling, and I've done that. I do baseball and softball, and usually do one game each day for football. And it's a cool way to I think watch our kids compete. I don't think there's any other state that gives their high school athletes the opportunity to compete at Gainbridge Fieldhouse and Lucas Oil Stadium and the Natatorium and Victory Field. And that's why I do it as much as anything. It's not just a matter of simply watching kids compete. It's the venues that you get to work in that really make it enjoyable.
Monrovia has a real, almost unreal connection to the 500.
Yeah.
So Arthur Newby, one of the 4 founders, was born here. Bettenhausen lived here for a while. You're the voice of the 500. So give us a little bit more feedback or a little bit more information on the Monrovia's connection, especially with your classmate Kyle Moyer.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle started working for Gary Bettenhausen, and I say working because normally when you work for somebody you get paid, and he didn't. He got paid in experience, and that was just, kind of like me getting the $5 a game. It wasn't about the money for Kyle. And he worked for Gary Bettenhausen for quite a while, and then a year or so after we graduated, he made his way out to California and worked for Dan Gurney. Made his way to a couple of other high-profile race teams like Gallus Racing, and I think Gallus is where he got his big break because in '92 he was on the crew that won the Indianapolis 500 with Allinger Jr. And, from there he went to work for Team Green and then Andretti Green Racing and became Michael's president. And then several years ago now he went to work for Roger Penske and is the general manager of Penske Racing. And he's been a part of 9 Indy 500 wins. And I'm just as proud of him as I am anyone because, I can remember him coming to school on Monday morning with grease under his fingernails and a dirty shirt and everything else because they drug the car in from who knows where after racing all weekend long and he was on no sleep, and then turned around and did the same thing the following weekend, it's a true rags to riches story, that's for sure. There's no doubt about it. And then, more recently we have Wyatt Harvey, whose dad has been with Ed Carpenter Racing for a number of years, and Connor Fields does a lot of hospitality work for IndyCar. And I've been able to take some of our kids up there. Ashley Trudeau, a recent graduate, has worked with us at Radio Network as an intern, and Andrew Willett, who's now at Ball State. Andrew worked in the media relations department at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So there's a really strong connection between this community and the Indianapolis 500.
Well, and then Tony Houck.
Yep, Tony Houck's another one for sure.
Also class of '92.
With Andretti for years, yeah.
So it's just really, there's probably, well, you're up there. Is there any other high school that has that much of a connection?
I can't think of it, really. I mean, a lot is made of Tim Cindric being at Pike High School and Governor Eric Holcomb, them being classmates. And there's some other, guys that maybe went to high school together and crew members and stuff like that. But I don't know of any other community that has the connection that this one has to that place for sure.
And Gary's sons are involved in...
Yeah, that's right. Todd and Kerry graduated in 1982 with Kyle and I. And have obviously stayed close to the sport over the years and carried on the name. Really big in racing simulators and things of that nature. So,
the other thing that I wanted to touch base with you about is just the legacy of Monrovia football. Because you were here with Staley and a little bit with Kaiser, correct?
Yes.
So Monrovia football has a lot of the traditions. And so Staley started a lot of that. Was he midnight practice and camp?
Yeah, he started midnight practice and the camp. Monrovia football is dedication. That all came from that area. Organization, the key to success. A lot of phrases that you see and that you hear. The Midnight Mile tradition we had for a number of years. They started all of that. And, there was a lot of success in Monrovia football, prior to the time that Coach Staley got here. But certainly 1978, I think, is what put the program on the map. And for a number of reasons. I mean, there were storylines there because Coach Staley and Coach Gillen and even Coach Kaiser, who was around at the time, those guys had all been with Coach Enright at Hamilton Southeastern. And then, I remember Coach Staley, my junior year, called me into his office. He was the athletic director and the head football coach at the time. And, when he told me he was going to Terre Haute North, I cried.
Yeah.
I was happy for him, but I think we were all very, very fortunate that Jim Kaiser was on the staff and took it over and, had an unbelievable record here. And it was about the time that I came back here from Terre Haute. I kind of felt like I might come back here and run the PA for him. And then I pick up the paper and I see that he's taking the job at Avon.
Yeah.
So I called him and I, seriously? But oddly enough, a year later he called me and I went out to Avon, did the PA for him for about 9 years. So
Staley started the midnight practice and the in-living camp, but where did the Monrovia, that green jacket, that Monrovia football's dedication jacket, was that during the Kaiser era?
That actually, I think, gosh, boy, you're asking me to go back away.
Was that Wolf's
Yeah, I think
dad?
it was Hank Wolf and those guys started a lot of that stuff. Kerry Loudermilk was another one with Hank Wolf and Mike Kemp and a bunch of those dads at the time. You know, of course, there had been dads prior to that. You know, George Watson and all of those guys very, very involved in the football program and supporting it. But, you know, Hank kind of led that next generation and really built up that booster program and provided a lot of things for our players and our program at the time. And you know, made it a lot easier for the athletic department to be able to spend some of their monies elsewhere.
Sure. But the legacy of Monrovia football, of course, you have Wayne Staley go to Terre Haute North, Kaiser's in the Coaches Hall of Fame, went to Avon. You have Rick Strife with 10 state championships, Tyron Hunt with 3. I mean, it's 13 from a legacy here. And then you've had other assistant coaches go on and do well. With Tom Blank at Center Grove, Hutchins is at Center Grove.
Right.
But then, like, your son. I mean,
well, Brian Crabtree, too. I mean,
Sure.
Brian was here with Brian Thompson and, you know, spent a year at North Putnam and then landed at North Vermilion. And he won a state championship there and finished runner-up at another one. He just recently resigned as football coach there, but Brian's done a tremendous job. Tom Blank, who taught here for years, was, you know, a head coach of yours. Tom is running out of fingers and thumbs, you know, for what they've done at Center Grove. But, yeah, my son's 30 years old. He was there as a player in 2009 and was there a couple of years ago with Zionsville as a defensive assistant and then was a corner and safeties coach at Ben Davis and finally got the blue ribbon hung around his neck this year. And I was proud to be able to do that game, not only for our family and to share that moment with him and be on the call of it, but Lance Scheib was doing the game with me, and Lance is a longtime family friend, and Lance has been very instrumental in my son's coaching career, and he's been influenced by Mark Bless at Avon, gave him his first coaching job, who part of that Staley coaching tree from Terre Haute North years ago, and then he worked with Larry McWhorter at Zionsville, who was a former state champion and spent 2 valuable years as a defensive coordinator at Speedway High School, where Denny Pelly was a longtime head coach, and then got a wonderful opportunity at Ben Davis with Coach Mann and that staff. And it was really a cool moment for our family, for sure.
You've had a lot of impact on the school. For a school our size to have the TV, radio, and broadcast program, it's pretty unreal. And how many students have you had recently decide to major or at least show interest in that?
One just changed her major, Allie Swafford, and I still speak to her. It's okay. But no, and I tell them, you know, chase your dream. But if this is it, I'm going to help you all I can. If you go back to August of this year, there were 8 at colleges, universities, in communications programs. There were 5 at Ball State, 1 at Grace College, Nolan Hendricks, and then Allie Swafford and Genevieve Malone at IU. Allie's since changed to speech pathology, which is fine. But we've also had a lot of successful students go on to do other things. A recent graduate, Faith Nagel, went to film school in Orlando and has graduated and is now in Nashville, Tennessee, working professionally, doing all kinds of freelance work and doing amazing things. I started 7 years ago, an invitation by Dr. R. William Roberson at the time to come here and start this program from scratch. I was in what is now the senior lounge upstairs. I had 10 kids in one class, little handheld Sony camera. And now we've got, you know, all of the stuff that we have. And we're up to, I think, 6 classes with about 73, 74 kids. And I got to thank not only Dr. R. and Brian Lewis and Mike Springer for bringing me back here, but, you know, Dr. Kirk Freeman, who took over for Dr. R., his support has just been amazing. Same thing with our current AD, Nick Pirica. The staff, you guys, all of you, You know, sometimes kids are late to your class because they're working on projects and things of that nature. And so it's been a collaborative effort. It really has. I mean, I want to thank Citizens Bank this year. They came up with the funding to be able to pay our kids to do the live stream of football and basketball. The Morgan County Substance Abuse Council has paid us the last couple of years to do public service announcements for them. So I've invited a lot of people who are very successful in this industry, like Tony Williams, who built our studios for us, who's one of the most respected at what he does anywhere in the country. We'll have a Super Bowl project where we'll have Matt Taylor, the voice of the Colts. We've had Dave First and Charlie Clifford when he was at Wish TV. Those guys come in and judge our competitions and give our kids professional advice. Wish TV has been kind enough the last 4 years now. Our kids shoot highlights on Friday nights of Monrovia football, and we're part of In the Zone. And what I think is cool is when you watch In the Zone on Friday nights, folks, they'll say, now let's go to Warren Central, and now let's go to Center Grove, now let's go to Ben Davis, and now let's go out to Monrovia where they took on the Lutheran Saints, you know. And what a great experience for those kids, you know. And so, you know, I don't do anything by myself. You know, you got to have support and you got to have help. And lucky for me, most of my life, I learned early to surround myself with people that are smarter than me, and that's not that hard to do. You know that better than anybody. Yeah, we're pretty proud of what we've built here, but we've had a lot of help doing it.
Well, I have benefited in a major way. A lot of your students have done a lot of the local history projects. Owen DeWeese filmed the first whole part of Monrovia Moments, and then Faith narrated all the documentaries. And originally we were going to have other students do that. Then after my mom heard Faith, she's like, you can't let anybody else do that. I think Mom liked Faith more than me at one point there. The other thing here is we started the Alumni Hall of Fame and you were in the first class. And I had 3 names written down, Branch McCracken, Bill Fisher, and you. And I was at the end, and before they got to the second person, all my names were done. So what are some of the other accolades that you've gotten other than the Monrovia Alumni Hall of Fame? Well, recently you've had a big one, so.
Yeah, I was recently, my second Hall of Fame, just recently learned I will April 7th go into the Indiana Sports Writers and Sports Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and that's unbelievable when you consider all of the people in this industry that have accomplished so many great things. And I want to thank Paul Condry of Regional Radio Sports. He and Greg Rakestraw were 2 of the guys that I think really kind of pushed for that. And you know, Paul was very flattering in saying that it was, you know, a unanimous vote, which is nice to hear. And I'm pleased at the fact that Paul said you're in for a variety of reasons. The work that I do here with the kids and with the IHSAA and with IndyCar, and that's all encompassing to me. And I don't say this just to say it, and I mean it. You know me as well as anybody. The work that I do here with these kids is more meaningful and more rewarding to me than any of that stuff or any of those plaques or any of those trophies. I mean, we've won stuff from the National Motorsports Press Association for our 500 coverage. You know, I've won other awards for, you know, individual broadcasting work and things of that nature in addition to the Hall of Fame stuff. But I just feel like that this is more meaningful, this is more beneficial. This is going to do more than to leave a legacy, I think, working with these kids than anything I've accomplished in terms of getting an award for a plaque or something like that. And it's something that I'm thankful for each and every day.
I think that will end our Monrovia Moments. This was Steve Reeder with Hall of Fame member Mark Jaynes.
Thanks, Coach.